Thank you all, and I appreciate your, again, as I said on Friday, I greatly appreciate it. I'm honored that you're all here, and I only ask one favor, that that you all continue to be a part of this movement, bringing developmental approaches to schools, to parents. Many of you are parents, bringing them to other parents, and that you create a ground root swell that transforms the way we not only take care of children with special needs, but the way we take care of all of ourselves and our families and our children. Because the principles are the same. They have to do with love, with warmth, with interaction, with communication, and it needs everybody in every location around the world to be working on this together. So we really have a job ahead of us. The world is moving, unfortunately, in many respects in the wrong direction. We're becoming more mechanized, we're hurrying too much, we're overloading ourselves and our families, and we're missing the essence of life with what got us here. If we look at human evolution, it was the ability of groups to form, of two people to relate to one another, to start interacting before words, just with the tiniest of gestures. And in our book, The First Idea, we trace this, how each baby and each child with special needs we work with, in many respects, repeats human evolution, repeats what we did when we came, so to speak, out of the trees, onto the ground, learned to stand upright. But nothing was more important than the ability to signal each other, the ability to start communicating. And it was with the tiniest of gestures, the tiniest of smiles, twinkles in the eyes being shared. This is what got us here. This is what got us to modern society. And guess what? We're beginning to lose it. Now, what is the big mistake? That was hopefully a sexy title to get you here. People always like to hear about mistakes, right? Are we doing anything right these days, or is it all mistakes? What is the big mistake? And before I say what it is, I want to make sure I don't step on any toes. So how many are here, if you would just raise your hands, how many are here who work in schools or educational settings? I mean, we're all educators, but are either special educators or, okay, we have lots. Are any of you happy who work in special education with children with special needs, autistic spectrum disorders and other special needs conditions? Are any of you happy with the way current special education is cooking, is going? If you are, raise your hands, because it's your toes I don't want to step on. Okay, no one's raising their hand. So I'm on safe ground. I won't injure anyone's self-esteem if I. Okay, what is the big mistake? And why are we wasting millions, if not billions of dollars on the way we currently conduct special education in this country and many other countries? And we talk about needing more money, but more money not well spent won't do the trick. In fact, I think we could do it for less. And sometimes less can be better if it's efficiently spent and well spent. So what is the big mistake? The big mistake, and how many of you think you can guess at it from my Friday comments? Who wants to say? Okay, Rebecca, go ahead. What is the big mistake? What is it? What is it? What is it? You put your foot in your mouth.
For me, the big mistake is putting the curriculum ahead of the children.
All right, putting the curriculum ahead of the children. The big mistake, that's a very good overview of the big mistake, but the big mistake is we're missing our favorite friend. Right. Special education and education in general begins with the notion that knowledge has no developmental sequence. That you can teach math or reading fairly directly. And so we have children in special education programs where the curriculum is to try to teach them how to add 2 and 2, or how to read, or how to sound out the letters and words. Correct? Now, the foundations for knowledge, for reading, for math, for learning history, for communicating, for thinking, all comes from our old friend affect at the beginning. And what I want to do, and that's yet not a big piece of our programs, and how do we get it into the programs? I want to trace for you how affect can lead to math skills, and how affect can lead to understanding history, understanding other cultures, reading comprehension, even reading itself. My good friend Pat Lindemuth, who recently passed away, she and I used to have wonderful conversations about this. And Harry Wax, who, Harry, I want to congratulate you for your well-deserved award. And I'm sorry I wasn't here earlier to clap with the rest of the audience for you. But Harry and I, Harry, the creator of really visual spatial thinking, along with Hans Firth, Harry recognizes the important role of affect. How does it begin, and how does it lead to these skills? I won't have time without keeping you all over. Many of you I know have airplane schedules and you need some time before the afternoon workshops. So I can't trace each and every academic skill and each and every important life skill to our old friend affect, but I'll give you a few examples. We talked about how, let's have the first slide because it'll kind of begin to illustrate this. Here you see affect leading to motor, leading to sensory, and then leading to our 9 levels, which is a way of organizing intellectual or thinking, emotional, social, higher level motor and higher level sensory capacities. And we integrated all these because we felt they all work together. That's the way the brain works. The brain doesn't work little pieces in isolation unless you create an artificial learning environment where you just target one or another part of the brain. So initially the baby learns to turn left or right because pleasurable affect is in mommy's voice, beginning of motor skills. The baby begins to use their eyes, their ears, their sense of touch, their internal awareness of their own movement, because that pleasurable affect begins inspiring them to move. If that's not there, we see failure to thrive, low muscle tone, and we begin seeing delays in these capacities, even when the nervous system is born intact, let alone when the nervous system has reason to have challenges because of genetic differences or because of intrauterine differences, exposures to toxic substances, for example, etc. And yet we've noticed that we can use our old friend affect to help children begin overcoming some of these challenges, even when they are genetic, because we know there are epigenes now. And as many of you know, the epigenes control the genes. So you can have two identical twins, very different because their epigenes are different. And why are the epigenes different? Because the environment is what influences the epigenes. So even the most ardent geneticists now are recognizing the important role of the environment. Now that same affect is what then creates relationships, right? Pleasurable affect leads to intimacy, relationships. Well, why are relationships important for academics? Because that relationship then leads to back and forth interaction and communication, the beginning of emotional signaling. Smiles, gestures, reaching, taking, right? Our little babies, we see that at 6, 7, 8, 9 months. That leads to more complex gesturing in the second year of life. And it's in that second year of life with the more complex gesturing that we begin seeing scientific reasoning, because the little toddler, little Susie, began going, ah, grabbing daddy's hand, pointing to the toy. And if little Susie is not doing that, and interestingly, even among children with spectrum disorders who regress at 18 months or 24 months, when we watch their videotapes closely, the earliest signs are they're not doing that complex gesturing in the second year of life. It's an early warning signal. And in fact, we are currently completing some research showing that we can pick this up often in the first year of life because of very subtle differences in the development of the signaling system. For example, the baby's more at risk, and don't have to be at risk because we can move in early and get the babies back on course. The babies at the greatest risk are more passive. You have to draw them out. They don't take the initiative. They're not going, ee. When mommy walks in the room or daddy walks in the room, they're not going, ah, look at me, They're not drawing the parent into the attention. They're not keeping up their 50% of the bargain in that two-way communication. But you can inspire them. You can entice them, just like we do with a 5-year-old who's not doing that, to begin that communication. Now, beyond communication, which is obviously an essential piece of knowledge development, it's this affective signaling that leads to the ability to create symbols. How many of you are familiar with our theory of how this works? Raise your hands if you really know it thoroughly and you could teach it. Okay, so very few. So I'm going to take a minute or two and go into this, because I don't want to repeat something you're already very familiar with. What happens is the little baby is a creature of kind of the extreme fight or flight reactions. Little baby kind of goes in an all or nothing way. We see this in the crying and the tantrums and the, if mommy doesn't provide or daddy doesn't provide what the baby wants, you get that all or nothing reaction, right? You can get aggression, you can get crying, you can get despair. However, between 5, 6 months and really 18 months, very gradually, as this signaling system, mostly through emotional expressiveness, becomes more complex, you begin changing from all or nothing to negotiation. The 14-month-old can go before they bite or grab. And you can respond with oh, is this what you want? And the little toddler can make a sound, or a hand gesture, or body posture change, and whammo, you've now got negotiation, right? Now, in the earlier all or nothing reaction pattern, the baby is at the mercy of these extreme reactions. They're precortical in terms of the wiring system. And when the baby is at the mercy of these, perception, what the baby sees, and action are kind of closely tied together. You have a perceptual motor link that's very tight. It's automatic. It's, in a sense, you would say it's almost instinctual, right? You get that automatic reaction, no separation, no flexibility. Now, as the signaling system develops, you begin separating perception, what you see, what you hear, what you touch, from the action. Because now you have this negotiation in between, right? So now you have freestanding perceptions or images. These are multisensory images of sight, of sound, of touch. So they're no longer tied directly to action. So if the toddler has a freestanding image of mommy, when the toddler sees mommy, it's not tied to crying or reaching right away for something. It's tied to the ability to begin negotiating. But you have this freestanding image. And this freestanding image gets invested with all kinds of experiences, with mommy, with daddy, with the table, with a ball, with your own sounds. Everyone with this? So as this freestanding image becomes invested with all these experiences, what do we call that? Huh? What? Say it loud.
Communication.
What?
Communication.
Yeah.
Symbolic communication.
Symbolic, yeah. It's the beginning of symbols. That's how symbols get formed. Now, believe it or not, what I've just presented to you may sound self-serving, but is the only coherent theory of symbol formation. My good, I would like to say friend because I wrote a monograph about him, but Piaget had a theory of symbol formation, having to do with assimilation and accommodation. But it was missing the critical piece, our old friend. Right. So Piaget never was able to communicate how symbols develop their meaning. He knew that the baby had to take action. Sensory motor patterns, they got more complex. You had to act on your environment. But what he wasn't aware of is what those actions created inside the child, which was our old friend affect. Now then, when the child is beginning to learn about numbers and quantity, how does the child learn that at first? Before they know what 4 is or what 8 is, they have to have a sense of quantity, right? So that sense of quantity develops from emotional experience with different quantities. So to a child just learning this, more or a lot is a little more than you expect. Little is less than you want. Eventually, this becomes systematized with numbers. So you can say, I want 6, not 4. Or I want 10, not 5. Or she has more than me. It gives numbers meaning. Obviously, it gives words meaning, because you can't understand the word without having the symbol that's been invested with all kinds of emotional meaning. So if you're going to read a story when you're 8 years old about a little boy who loved his bicycle, to know what love means, well, you already know what love means before you can say the word love. Because remember, in that second year of life, you're interacting with mommy and daddy and others in many loving ways. Then finally you get the word love, which becomes the way you label the symbol, which is already in there as an image, right, of love. Same thing with hate, unfortunately. So reading comprehension is based on this. The sense of space that Harry Wax talks about, and that Serena beautifully interviewed Harry this morning about. The toddler and the baby is learning about how their body moves in space, how the body interacts with other moving bodies, how a room is constructed. But each of those experiences have meaning for that, let's say that toddler who's going searching for a toy in the left or the right corner or the middle or up on the shelf, because that loved toy creates affect in the baby that gives that area, that space, meaning to the child. So the sense of space, the sense of the world, the narrow-looking child versus the broad-looking child, has to do with where affect has invested space with meaning for the child. The ability to make letters, the ability, Pat Lindenberg and I used to talk about, she would tell me about examples of how she would use writing, in the air and taking actions that created letters and numbers to give it more meaning for the child. Well, that created, again, the affective context, the affective framework. Now, obviously, higher level thinking, as we not only invest motor and sensory experience, but go through our 9 stages, which I won't repeat here, but everything from attention and engagement always up to reflective thinking, each of those levels have to be part of an affective exchange to be occurring, for the transformation to occur from the earlier level to the next level. So the child who goes from concrete all or nothing thinking, which characterizes too much of the world these days, right? My way or the highway, leading to wars. In order to get to the next level of gray area thinking, where you can see subtleties and shades of gray and finally be reflective, you have to have affective experiences. So the parent who simply says to the 4-year-old, not only yes or no to going outside, but gee, why do you want to go outside? Well, can you give me another reason? And sweetheart, how much do you want to go out right now? Okay, you say how much, the child is developing that gray area thinking, right? That ability to appreciate subtlety that many claim some of our politicians need more of. But we all fall into traps. We all regress under the pressure of strong emotion. So who among us hasn't become an all or nothing thinker, a my way or the highway kind of thinker? Or worse yet, impulsive, where we go back to action modes, hitting. One of the biggest problems with older children with special needs, teenagers who become very, very large, is how we help control aggression. Because if they haven't developed gray area thinking, they become aggressive in school. Now, some time ago, a couple of years ago, I talked about the Agnes principle as a way of helping to control aggression without injuring the self-esteem and making the aggressive child more aggressive. That when someone's acting up, you clear out the area for them, make everyone else safe, and then work with that child. Now, fortunately, the Agnes principle originator, which started in Uganda from her mother and her mother, is here. So, Agnes? And I've discovered that there's a whole group of colleagues from Uganda who have a wonderful history of knowledge developed from the oral tradition and from the experience of one generation to the next generation, such things as how to handle aggression. So these are just a few illustrations. These are just a few illustrations of how knowledge develops from the beginning, from the bottom up. Now, so the big mistake is affect is missing, and putting that in a larger context, we have a top-down approach in special education. That top-down approach leads to too much splinter skill building, too much drilling, too much memory-based learning, and not enough appreciation, as my friend Harry Wax emphasizes all the time, of the building blocks, the foundations. So the big mistake is top-down. The correction is bottom-up. You got to build the foundations. Start from where the child is. So when Rebecca said, we go to the curriculum, not the child, she was emphasizing we're not starting from the bottom up, from the foundations, building step by step by step by step by step. Now, so if we don't want to further undermine the development of children who already come with challenges, whether they're motor or sensory or language or interpersonal challenges. We have to build from the bottom up. The child who's not relating has to learn to relate first. The child who doesn't have that continuous flow, remember we emphasized that on Friday, has to have that continuous flow of back and forth interaction with somebody that child cares about. That leads to self-regulation, that leads to symbol formation, and that's the chance the child has of making substantial progress. And that will lead to math and other skills. Because you can't teach it until you have that continuous flow, which allows you to be in constant contact with the world. Because think of a child who's not in continuous flow, they're in and out of the world. They're sampling the world. So that's the big mistake. It's a huge mistake because it's affecting millions and millions of children around the world. And we collectively have to change it. And how many of you feel constrained by your administrators and the people who run the show not to do what you think is correct and right, or know what you could? Yeah, most of us, right? So we have to educate the administrators because they're just doing what they think is right, what they think is cost effective, and we have to be the ones to educate them. Now, once we have a bottom-up approach, once we build foundations, then it leads to something that I call the learning tree. And will be described in great detail in a book that'll be out about a year from now. Tentatively titled, I Never Met a Child Who Couldn't Learn More and Better. And let's have the next slide. The learning tree, as you see, has, can you all see that one? And read it? Okay, you have the roots, you have the trunk, and you have the branches. And let's have the next slide. Well, basically, this just shows each part of the learning tree. This shows the roots. And the roots are, you know, your auditory processing, your visual spatial processing, your motor capacities, motor planning, all the basics that children have trouble with. And you see here the soil is nurturing interactions. Because the nurturing interactions and the work we do in that context with our team approach, our speech pathologists, our occupational therapists, our mental health professionals, they create that help parents and families, and many times parents and families do this intuitively, that nurturing environment that gives strong roots. Next slide. The strong roots lead to a strong tree trunk. Our tree trunk is our 9 levels of thinking, which has to do with interaction, affective signaling, symbol formation, creative use of symbols, pretend play, logical thinking, and then higher levels of thinking. Out of that comes our next slide. Out of that comes our academic skills. Reading comprehension, math. It also leads to capacities like empathy, the ability to relate to others, the ability for being creative, the ability for leadership, when I call them great kids capacities. There's also a book I wrote called Great Kids, talking about how these capacities develop. So that these are the great kids capacities. These are the social skills. This is what some colleagues call emotional intelligence. But they're really the emotional and social skills that we've known about for some time. So if you build from the foundations up, you have a healthy learning tree. And if you have a healthy learning tree, then you begin getting children, even with the most severe special needs conditions, who show progress. Some very rapidly, like that 8.5-year-old I showed, who's now in college. And we have a whole group of those children. But others who struggle, who make very slow progress because they may have a seizure disorder, they may have other neurologic challenges that make their progress slow. But you know what? Every single child, every single one that we've worked with in this way, I can't think of one who hasn't, makes progress towards healthy development. So I can't think of one child with the most severe forms of autism, even, the most severe, who hasn't developed the ability to begin relating and enjoying relationships and looking at others because they want to. And if they do and are blessed enough to develop some academic skills, they develop them with meaning, not rote memory. So that's why this is so critical, why it's so absolutely essential. Okay, we can go with the next, if there is one. Oh, this just outlines what some of the great kids' capacities are, like self-esteem, moral integrity, etc. Next, if we have one. Now here's the whole learning tree. Very, very complex. But this has to be fueled by affective experiences at every turn, every single turn, with a bottom-up foundation-building approach. Okay, we can shut off the slides. What is the big challenge we face, however? Does anyone disagree with this bottom-up foundation-building approach? Obviously, we haven't gone into a great deal of detail today because you can't do that much in 45 minutes, but we're all in agreement. So how do we transform our educational system? How do we transform special education so we're not wasting resources, we're using them well, we're using them wisely? What are some of the things we need to do? Well, number one, we need to transform regular education, obviously, as well. And I couldn't agree more. Regular education is, in many respects, just as big a mess, if not a bigger mess, than special education. And there are some creative schools that do it better. Other schools don't do it as well. And it's not the fault of the well-motivated teachers. It's a tradition of memory-based learning that's been passed on from generation to generation, and a top-down approach rather than a bottom-up approach. And it's a lack of understanding of how these capacities develop, which has to be part of our training programs for education. So this has to begin with, number one, revamping education for educators, so that the human development and the developmental approach is at the heart of that education. How each capacity they're going to be working on, whether it's with kindergarten children or 10th graders or college professors, there's an understanding of how that particular knowledge develops throughout the cycle of life. Number two, we have to transform the structure of schools, because having children who can't relate to each other sit around in circle time and having people hold them because they can't sit in circle time, and where they're not yet able to interact and signal others, let alone talk, sit passively in circle time while someone's trying to entertain them, or the one or two children who can speak. Is that any way to treat a good friend? So we have to transform the structure. Lots of the kids need one-on-one. Oh, but we can't afford it. We don't have the staffing for one-on-one. Oh my God, how are we going to do this? You're talking about breaking the bank. I'd rather break the bank than break the heart of a little child who wants to learn. But there are millions of people who love to volunteer. There are millions of retired individuals who want to come in. Others who would like to come in and help, who have free hours. But we've restricted that. We don't allow that. So we have to revamp the structure. We have to know what each child needs, and then create an environment for that child. Some of the children who, for example, are sensory craving may need a sensory environment right there in the classroom, in the corner of the classroom, so they can learn to relate, because only while on a swing, or only while getting deep pressure, or only while moving can they begin relating to others. So we have countless children with special needs who begin vocalizing and begin signaling when they're signaling for more movement, when someone's picking them up and playing the airplane game, or when they're on a swing. So the structure has to be able to tailor the approach to the child with special needs. All the things we were talking about on Friday, and all the things, many of you who went to the workshops on our DIR floor time model SOAR, has to be able to be created in the classroom for the child with special needs, so that there's that nurturing, constant relationship with one or two key adults, and there's an environment and a learning approach tailored to that child's nervous system. Because without that, there's no chance. There's absolutely no chance. And this is true for all children. We have to tailor the learning. When we say there are different learners, there are different learners. But many kids are, in a sense, lucky. They can learn in groups. They can learn even when the environment doesn't lend itself to learning, because they're really learning on their own. They're learning from parents. They're learning from the world. You know, they're taking in knowledge. They're reading. But there are so many children who are not. Not only children with special needs, but children who have harsh environmental conditions, where they're not given opportunities in other settings. So we have to create new structures in schools that are tailored to the child's nervous system, where education is individualized. And that's going to require a major revamping of our thinking. It's not going to happen easily. It's not going to happen overnight. We have to educate our politicians. And our legislators have to then create not more regulations and more rules, but a context where educators, boards of education, schools that teach teachers and educators, are trained. So we have a major structural change to make in this country if we're going to transform education to what it ought to be, so that every child has a healthy learning tree. Because without a healthy learning tree, without that child who's never learned to decode different sounds, because in the first year of life, either an auditory processing problem or the lack of caregiver-infant interchange didn't lead to enough variation in sound to develop that ability to appreciate different subtleties of sound, is going to have a hard time learning to be a reader and then learning to comprehend what they read. So we have to go back to that. Again, create those interactions that will create that. The brain, interestingly, keeps developing into the 50s and into the 60s. And I hope into the 70s and 80s. And 90s and beyond. And I think it does. I think there's more wisdom. I think there's development occurring all the time. So we have a major job. Are you up for it? How do we do it? Okay. Ricky, tell us, how are we going to do it?
I'm first going to work on healthcare, but how do we do it?
How, you're going to work on healthcare first?
We've got two huge bureaucracies that do things the way they've always done it. I never envy a teacher there, the teacher who's in the classroom, because they to be creative requires having a creative administrator there who can work.
Right. So how are we going to do it? We're trying to transform healthcare. We see the political process. We're not even having a debate about education, though. It's not even in the agenda. It's assumed we know how to do it. So who has to do it? Ricky, you have to do it. You have to get up on your pedestal in California, okay? Get out of your house, okay? Use all your political influence and start knocking on doors, okay? Okay? Start getting to your congressmen, start getting to your state legislators. One thing we can't do, we can't be passive. We can't be namby-pambies. We can't be quiet. We got to shout from the rooftops. And everyone has to make education as much of the debate as healthcare. It's as big an issue, if not a bigger issue. And only one way those we elect, and we've elected new leadership, will pay attention if they hear you shouting. I have some good friends in the White House, and I've shared some of these ideas. And I said, we need to hear more grassroots, because we can't raise these issues, we can't influence Congress, we can't get our congressional colleagues unless they're hearing from their constituents. So everybody has to do their part. Everyone has to start shouting. Let's get education to the top of the agenda. Let's talk about the big mistake. let's talk about some broad concepts. Bottom-up foundation building versus top-down skill memory. Let's label these things for what they are. Let's be active. Let's not wait for the next guy or next gal to do it. So that's my answer, Ricky. Stand up. All right. I don't want you signing up, I want you leading. You see, everyone wants to sign up. We need everyone being a leader in their communities. Everyone has to say, this is my cause. I'm going to lead the way. There's big issues going on now in legislation for paying for treatments for autism. And those with the big bucks now are arguing for a top-down approach, more of a memory-based approach. Quote, that's where the data is. Well, actually, the data shows it doesn't work very well, but that's being ignored. And the big bucks, because we're not shouting enough, but some of you are working in your communities, and some of you are having success. And those I want to thank. And I'm doing all I can. So we need to all work together. And so the answer is, it's not going to happen without each and every one of us making this a major, major issue. Now, I wish we could spend the next 3-4 hours brainstorming together about the best ways to organize, the best ways to do this. I really implore you to do this in your own communities, with your own groups, right after the conference today. But I want to give you a chance to have your lunch. I want to give you a chance to go to your afternoon workshops. So first, before I make some announcements, I just want to thank you for your attention to my session this afternoon and giving me the chance to speak to you again. Again, I'm honored to be able to do that. So thank you very, very much.